Staff Sergeant Riley Hammond thought she had seen it all in her 12 years at Fort Braxton. She'd broken down cocky college graduates, transformed street kids into soldiers, and earned a reputation as the toughest drill instructor on the East Coast. But when a quiet recruit named Elena Martinez stepped onto her firing range that scorching July morning, Riley had no idea she was about to meet someone who would shatter every assumption she'd ever made about what a soldier should look like. What happened next would become the most talked about incident in the base's history, and it all started with a shooting stance that looked completely wrong to everyone watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete of Fort Braxton's main training facility as Staff Sergeant Riley Hammond adjusted her campaign hat and surveyed the line of new recruits stretching across the firing range. Sweat already beaded on foreheads despite the early hour, and the familiar smell of gun oil and desert dust filled the air. This was Riley's domain, her kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in military precision. At 34, Riley had earned every stripe on her sleeve the hard way. She'd clawed her way up from a scared teenager from rural Alabama who'd enlisted to escape a dead-end life, transforming herself into one of the most feared and respected drill sergeants in the entire Southeastern Command. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went. Recruits would whisper stories about Hurricane Hammond long before they ever stepped foot on her range. Riley took pride in her ability to spot weakness from 50 yards away. She could identify the quitters before they even knew they wanted to quit, the troublemakers before they caused their first problem, and the hidden gems buried beneath layers of civilian softness. Her success rate was legendary. Over 90% of recruits who made it through her program went on to exemplary military careers. Listen up, maggots. Riley's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Today we separate the soldiers from the wannabes. Some of you think you know how to shoot because you went hunting with daddy or played video games in mommy's basement. I'm here to tell you that everything you think you know is wrong, and I'm going to rebuild you from the ground up. The line of recruits stood at rigid attention. 43 young men and women who'd arrived at Fort Braxton 3 weeks earlier with dreams of military glory and service to their country. Most of them had already been broken down and were slowly being rebuilt in the Army's image, but the firing range was where Riley truly made her mark. This was where she separated the wheat from the chaff. Her eagle eyes swept across the formation, cataloging each recruit's posture, attitude, and potential. There was Johnson, the farm kid from Iowa who'd probably handled rifles since he could walk but lacked discipline. Patterson, the city girl from Chicago who jumped at every loud noise but had the determination of a bulldog. Williams, the college graduate who thought his degree made him smarter than everyone else and would need that attitude adjusted quickly. Then her gaze landed on someone who didn't fit any of her usual categories. Private Elena Martinez stood fifth. From the left, her slight frame almost lost among the larger recruits surrounding her. At maybe 5'3" and barely meeting the minimum weight requirements, she looked like a strong wind could knock her over. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation style, her uniform crisp and properly maintained, but there was something about her that immediately raised Riley's hackles. Maybe it was the way Elena stood, not the rigid, almost fearful attention of most new recruits, but with a quiet confidence that seemed completely out of place. Her dark eyes didn't dart around nervously like the others. Instead, they remained fixed straight ahead with an unsettling steadiness. Most recruits either tried too hard to impress Riley or cowered under her intimidating presence. Elena Martinez did neither. Riley had read all their files, of course. Elena was 22, born in San Antonio, Texas, to a family of teachers and social workers. No military background, no hunting experience, no previous firearms training listed anywhere in her paperwork. She'd scored reasonably well on the written exams and physical fitness tests, but nothing that stood out as exceptional. On paper, she was exactly the kind of recruit who typically struggled with weapons training. So why did something about her make Riley's instincts prickle with unease? "Martinez," Riley barked, her voice echoing across the range. Front and center. Elena stepped forward without hesitation, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost out of place in military boots. She stopped precisely 3 feet from Riley and snapped to attention with textbook precision. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Riley circled her slowly, looking for any detail out of place, any sign of the cockiness or fear she was used to dealing with. Elena's uniform was immaculate, her bearing perfect, her responses crisp and immediate. But those eyes, there was something behind those dark eyes that Riley couldn't quite place. "Tell me, Martinez," Riley said, stopping directly in front of the smaller woman. "What makes you think you can handle a weapon? You look like you'd have trouble opening a jar of pickles, let alone engaging enemy targets under pressure." A few snickers rippled through the formation, quickly silenced by Riley's withering glare. Elena's expression didn't change, didn't so much as twitch. "I'm here to learn, Staff Sergeant. Whatever you need to teach me, I'm ready to absorb it." It was the perfect answer, humble, eager, respectful. So why did it feel like Elena was humoring her? Riley had built her reputation on breaking down recruits' preconceptions and rebuilding them with proper military fundamentals. She'd seen every type of attitude problem imaginable, the know-it-alls who thought civilian experience translated directly to military proficiency, the scared kids who needed confidence built from scratch, the rebels who had to be convinced that following orders was literally a matter of life and death. But Elena Martinez wasn't fitting into any of those categories, and that bothered Riley more than she cared to admit. "We'll see about that," Riley muttered, turning to address the entire formation again. "Today we're starting with basic marksmanship fundamentals. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, follow through. Some of you think shooting is about being tough or lucky. You're wrong. Shooting is about precision, discipline, and muscle memory developed through endless repetition of proper technique." She walked them through the basics with military efficiency, demonstrating proper stance, grip, and sight picture. The recruits absorbed the information with varying degrees of understanding, some nodding along confidently while others looked overwhelmed by the technical details. When it came time for the practical exercise, Riley positioned herself where she could observe every recruit's form and technique. This was where the real learning happened, where she could identify and correct the countless small errors that separated accurate shooting from spray and pray desperation. The first group moved to the firing line with the careful deliberation of people handling unfamiliar and potentially dangerous equipment. Riley watched as they settled into their positions, calling out corrections and adjustments with her usual sharp efficiency. "Johnson, your grip is too tight. You're strangling the weapon instead of controlling it." "Patterson, relax your shoulders. You're not lifting weights." "Williams, your stance is too wide. This isn't a golf course." One by one, she worked her way down the line, making the hundreds of small corrections that would eventually become second nature. Most recruits responded well to her guidance, their initial awkwardness gradually giving way to something approaching proper form. Then she reached Elena Martinez's position, and everything she thought she knew about teaching marksmanship went out the window. Elena had settled into a shooting stance that looked completely wrong by every textbook Riley had ever studied. Her feet weren't positioned according to regulation. Her body angle was unconventional, and her grip on the weapon appeared almost casual. Everything about her posture screamed amateur, and Riley felt her professional irritation spike. "Martinez." Riley's voice cracked like a whip. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? That stance is all wrong. You're standing like you're waiting for a bus, not preparing to engage a target." Elena looked up from her weapon with those unervingly calm eyes. I was trying to find a comfortable position, Staff Sergeant. Comfortable? Riley's voice rose an octave. This isn't about comfort, Private. This is about proper military technique developed over decades of combat experience. You don't get to improvise just because the regulation form doesn't feel natural to your civilian sensibilities. The entire firing line had gone quiet, everyone turning to watch the confrontation unfold. Riley was known for her public corrections, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested this was going to be more intense than usual. Step back from the line, Riley commanded. I'm going to demonstrate proper technique, and then you're going to mirror exactly what I show you. No modifications, no personal touches, no civilian bad habits. Military standard, by the book. End of discussion. Elena complied without argument, stepping back and watching attentively as Riley assumed the textbook shooting stance. Every angle was perfect, every muscle properly tensioned, every detail exactly as specified in the training manuals Riley had memorized years ago. This is how a soldier shoots, Riley announced, her voice carrying across the range for everyone to hear. Notice the foot position, the body angle, the weapon grip. This stance has been tested in combat conditions around the world. It provides maximum stability, optimal sight alignment, and consistent repeatability under stress. She held the position for several long seconds, letting the recruits absorb every detail. Then she straightened and gestured for Elena to take her place. Now, you try it, exactly as I demonstrated. Elena moved back to the firing line and attempted to mirror Riley's stance. Her form was closer to regulation, but still felt somehow off, like she was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit properly. Riley made a series of minor adjustments, moving Elena's feet, adjusting her grip, correcting her posture, until the position looked acceptably military. Better, Riley grudgingly admitted. Still not natural, but technique comes before comfort every time. The muscle memory will develop with practice. What happened next caught everyone off guard, including Riley herself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Staff Sergeant, Elena said quietly, her voice barely carrying beyond Riley's position. Would you mind if I asked a question about sight alignment? Riley was already starting to turn away, ready to move on to the next recruit, but something in Elena's tone made her pause. There was a precision to the question, a technical specificity. That didn't match Elena's supposed inexperience with firearms. What's your question, Martinez? Elena adjusted her position slightly, bringing the weapon up to her shoulder with movements that suddenly seemed far more fluid than they had moments before. I'm wondering about the relationship between front sight focus and target acquisition. Speed. In a dynamic situation, how do you balance the precision of perfect sight alignment with the need for rapid target engagement? Riley blinked, caught completely off guard. That wasn't a question she'd expect from someone with no firearms background. It demonstrated an understanding of advanced marksmanship concepts that took most soldiers months to grasp. That's an advanced topic, Martinez. We're focusing on fundamentals today. I understand, Staff Sergeant. I was just curious about the practical applications. There was something in Elena's voice, a quiet confidence that made Riley's professional instincts sing with warning bells. She'd heard that tone before, but only from soldiers with extensive combat experience or specialized training. It was the voice of someone who already knew the answers to the questions they were asking. Riley studied Elena's face carefully, looking for any sign of the cockiness or hidden agenda she'd learned to spot in recruits trying to show off their civilian experience. But Elena's expression remained perfectly neutral, professionally respectful, giving nothing away. We'll cover advanced applications later in your training, Riley said finally. For now, concentrate on mastering the basics. Everything else builds from proper fundamentals. Elena nodded and settled back into her assigned position. But Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something she didn't fully understand yet. The first shots rang out across the range 15 minutes later. The sharp cracks echoing off the concrete barriers and rolling across the desert landscape beyond Fort Braxton's perimeter. Riley positioned herself behind the firing line with her spotting scope and clipboard, ready to evaluate each recruit's performance and identify areas needing immediate correction. Johnson, the Iowa farm boy, performed exactly as expected. Decent natural ability marred by overconfidence and sloppy technique. His shots clustered reasonably well, but his form deteriorated with each round as he relied on instinct rather than the disciplined repetition Riley had just taught them. She made notes on his scorecard about trigger control and follow-through. Patterson surprised her by maintaining steady concentration despite her obvious nervousness. The Chicago girl's shots were scattered, but showed signs of systematic improvement as she worked through Riley's instructions. Her hands shook slightly, but she was clearly listening and adapting. Exactly the kind of coachable attitude that often produced excellent soldiers. Williams, predictably, was overthinking every shot. His engineering background made him want to analyze and optimize every variable instead of simply executing the fundamentals Riley had drilled into them. His accuracy suffered as he spent too much time adjusting his position between shots, instead of developing consistent muscle memory. Then, Elena Martinez stepped up to the line, and Riley found herself watching more intently than she had any reason to. Elena's initial shots were adequate, nothing spectacular, but solid performance within acceptable parameters for a new recruit. Her technique looked textbook correct, following Riley's instructions with mechanical precision. The kind of performance that would earn a passing grade without drawing particular attention. But Riley was watching Elena's face through her spotting scope, and what she saw there didn't match the adequate but unremarkable performance downrange. Elena's expression held the same unsettling calm she displayed earlier, as if she was deliberately constraining herself rather than struggling with unfamiliar equipment. After Elena's fifth shot, Riley noticed something that made her lower the spotting scope and look directly at the recruit. Elena had fired her rounds in a steady rhythm, each shot perfectly timed, with none of the hesitation or adjustment typical of new shooters. More tellingly, she hadn't once looked through this scope to check her shot placement, something even experienced shooters did regularly to gauge their performance. It was as if Elena already knew exactly where each round had gone. Riley moved down to the target retrieval area and pulled Elena's target for closer inspection. The shots formed a tight group slightly left of center, good enough to pass the qualification standard, but deliberately imperfect in a way that suggested controlled performance rather than natural limitation. Martinez, Riley called out as the recruit safed her weapon and stepped back from the line. "Bring your gear and follow me." Elena complied immediately, securing her rifle and ammunition before joining Riley at a position away from the other recruits. Riley held up the target, studying the shot pattern one more time before making her assessment. "Your grouping is acceptable, but off-center," Riley said, watching Elena's reaction carefully. "That suggests a consistent error in your sight alignment or breathing technique. We're going to work on it individually while the others finish their strings." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Riley led Elena to a separate firing position at the far end of the range, away from the noise and distraction of the main group. This was standard procedure for recruits who needed additional attention, but Riley's motivation was different this time. She wanted to observe Elena without the performance pressure of the group setting. "Show me your stance again," Riley instructed. "Exactly as we practiced." Elena assumed a regulation position with precise military bearing, but Riley could see the subtle tension in her movements, the way she held herself slightly back from her natural inclinations. It reminded Riley of watching a professional Dancer perform basic steps, technically correct, but somehow restrained. Fire 3 rounds at your own pace, Riley commanded. Focus on sight alignment and trigger control. Elena settled into position and fired 3 shots with the same steady rhythm she displayed earlier. Through the spotting scope, Riley watched. The bullets impact in another tight group, this time slightly high and right of center. Still within acceptable parameters, still just imperfect enough to avoid drawing attention. But Riley was beginning to understand the pattern. "Elena," she said, using the recruit's first name for the first time, "I want you to show me something. Fire 3 more rounds, but this time I want you to aim for the exact center of the bullseye. Don't worry about technique or form, just put the rounds where you want them to go." For the first time since Riley had met her, Elena hesitated. The pause lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm Riley's growing suspicions. "Staff Sergeant, I thought we were working on proper fundamentals. That's an order, Private. 3 rounds, center target, best effort." Elena's entire demeanor shifted in a way so subtle that anyone not watching specifically for it would have missed the change entirely. Her breathing deepened slightly. Her stance settled into something that looked almost identical to the regulation position, but felt completely different. When she raised the rifle, the movement was fluid as water, natural as breathing. The first shot cracked across the range, and Riley knew before she looked through the scope that it had found its mark perfectly. The second and third followed in rapid succession, each round placed with surgical precision in the exact center of the target. Riley lowered her spotting scope and stared at Elena, who was already safing her weapon with practiced efficiency. The tight grouping wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. The kind of shooting that took years of intensive training to develop, the kind of precision that couldn't be hidden behind deliberate mediocrity once it was unleashed. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Riley asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Elena's mask slipped for just a moment, and Riley caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. It wasn't fear or embarrassment or the typical reaction of a recruit caught in deception. It was the cold, professional assessment of someone evaluating potential threats and calculating responses. "I'm not sure what you mean, Staff Sergeant," Elena replied, but her voice lacked the earlier conviction. "I just followed your instructions to aim for the center." Riley had spent 12 years breaking down lies, half-truths, and carefully constructed deceptions. She'd heard every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to hide civilian experience or military background. Elena's response was technically true, but fundamentally dishonest, and they both knew it. "Stand at ease, Martinez," Riley said, setting down her clipboard and facing Elena directly. "We need to have a conversation, and I need you to understand that lying to a non-commissioned officer is a serious offense under military law." Elena's posture relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained alert and calculating. Riley had seen that look before, but only in soldiers returning from extended combat, deployments, or specialized operations training. It was the hyper-aware state of someone accustomed to environments where situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. "I'm not lying, Staff Sergeant. I'm following orders and performing to the best of my ability." "The best of your ability? Just put 3 rounds through the same hole at 50 meters with a rifle you've supposedly never fired before," Riley said flatly. "I've been training soldiers for over a decade, and I can count on one hand the number of people I've seen shoot like that on their first day." The sound of continued firing from the main range provided a backdrop of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the tension building between the two women. Riley could see other drill instructors working with their recruits in the distance, following the same training progression she'd run hundreds of times before. But nothing about this situation felt routine. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Riley could almost see her weighing options and calculating risks. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality, Not the crisp military responses of a new recruit, but the measured tones of someone accustomed to careful communication. Staff Sergeant Hammond, I joined the Army to serve my country and contribute my skills to the mission. I'm prepared to follow orders, complete my training, and perform whatever duties are assigned to me. My background or previous experience doesn't change those commitments. It was a skillful non-answer that acknowledged Riley's suspicions without confirming them. Elena had neither denied having specialized experience nor admitted to deliberately concealing it. She'd simply redirected the conversation to her present circumstances and future intentions. Riley felt a familiar thrill of professional challenge. She'd always enjoyed the psychological chess game involved in breaking down recruits' barriers and getting to the truth beneath their carefully constructed presentations. But Elena was playing at a completely different level than the typical scared teenager or overconfident college graduate. Your file says you're from San Antonio, Riley said, changing tactics. Family of teachers and social workers. No military background, no hunting experience, no competitive shooting. You supposedly learned everything you know about firearms in the past 3 weeks of basic training. That's correct, Staff Sergeant. So explain to me how someone with no firearms experience develops the muscle memory and breathing control I just witnessed. Explain how you knew to ask about sight alignment and target acquisition speed. Explain how you can place 3 shots through the same hole while deliberately missing the center on your previous strings. Elena's expression didn't change, but Riley caught a slight tightening around her eyes. The recruit was good at maintaining her cover, but she wasn't unreadable. Riley pressed her advantage. I've seen that kind of shooting before, Martinez. I've seen it from Delta Force operators returning from overseas deployments. I've seen it from Marine Scout snipers with multiple combat tours. I've seen it from Navy SEALs running training exercises on this very range. At the mention of Navy SEALs, Riley noticed the slightest reaction, not surprise or confusion, but recognition. Elena's breathing pattern changed almost imperceptibly, and her weight shifted in a way that suggested heightened alertness rather than fear. Riley had found the pressure point. So here's what's going to happen, Riley continued, her voice dropping to the authoritative tone she used for serious disciplinary discussions. You're going to start telling me the truth about who you are and what kind of training you've received. Because I can guarantee you that whatever game you think you're playing here is going to catch up with you eventually. Staff Sergeant, I understand your confusion, but no. Riley cut her off sharply. You don't get to manage this conversation anymore. I'm not some fresh lieutenant you can snow with carefully worded responses and misdirection. I've been doing this job since you were in high school, and I know when someone is running a deception operation. The phrase deception operation hung in the air between them, laden with military implications that went far beyond simple recruit mischief. Riley watched Elena process the accusation and its potential consequences. Elena was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, her dark eyes focused on something beyond Riley's shoulder. When she finally looked back, her expression had hardened into something that looked almost like resolve. What would you like me to tell you, Staff Sergeant? Elena asked, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. That I'm more than I appear? That my file doesn't tell the complete story? That there might be aspects of my background that aren't reflected in standard personnel records? Now they were getting somewhere. Riley felt the familiar satisfaction of a breakthrough in a difficult interrogation, but it was tempered by growing unease about what she might be uncovering. I want you to tell me who you really are, Riley said simply. No more word games, no more misdirection, just the truth. Elena looked out across the desert landscape beyond the base perimeter, then back at Riley with an expression that seemed almost sad. The truth is complicated, Staff Sergeant. And some truths carry consequences that affect more people than just the person telling them. Before Riley could respond to Elena's cryptic statement about complicated truths, the sharp blast of a whistle cut across the range. Master Sergeant David Chun, the range safety officer, was signaling the end of the morning shooting session. The sound jolted both women back to the immediate reality of their military environment. "We're not finished with this conversation," Riley said quietly, her eyes locked on Elena's face. "Report to my office at 1400 hours, full dress uniform." Elena nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and resignation. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." As they rejoined the main group of recruits, Riley's mind raced through possibilities and implications. In 12 years of training soldiers, she'd encountered plenty of recruits with hidden backgrounds, former gang members trying to escape their past, college athletes looking for structure and purpose, even the occasional military brat following family tradition. But Elena Martinez was something entirely different. The precision of those final 3 shots kept replaying in Riley's memory. That level of accuracy didn't come from natural talent or casual practice. It required thousands of rounds, professional instruction, and the kind of pressure testing that only came from real-world application. The question wasn't whether Elena had received specialized training. The question was what kind, and why she was concealing it. The afternoon briefing in the base conference room did nothing to improve Riley's mood. Colonel James Morrison, Fort Braxton's commanding officer, was reviewing the quarterly training statistics when he mentioned something that made Riley's blood pressure spike. "I want to commend Staff Sergeant Hammond for her exceptional performance with the new recruit cohort," Morrison announced to the assembled NCOs. "Her group's marksmanship scores are running 15% above base average, with several individuals showing remarkable improvement over their initial assessments." Riley accepted the praise with professional courtesy, but internally she was fuming. Elena Martinez's artificially suppressed performance had been factored into those statistics, making Riley's success appear greater than it actually was. Worse, it suggested that Elena's deception was sophisticated enough to fool not just drill instructors, but the entire evaluation system. After the meeting, Riley caught up with Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, who ran the base's personnel records division. Thompson was a meticulous administrator who'd been tracking soldier documentation for nearly 2 decades, and if anyone could help her dig deeper into Elena's background, it would be him. "Marcus, I need you to take another look at one of my recruits," Riley said, sliding Elena's file across his desk. "Something doesn't add up about her background, and I need to know if there's information that's not making it into the standard paperwork." Thompson opened the file and scanned through Elena's documentation with practiced efficiency. Martinez Elena, San Antonio, Texas. Family background checks out. Father teaches high school mathematics. Mother works for the county social services department. No criminal record, no military connections, standard educational background through community college. What about medical records? Psychological evaluations? Any flags or restrictions? Thompson flipped through several more pages, his expression growing puzzled. "That's interesting. Her medical clearance came through a different processing center than most Texas recruits. Usually they go through Fort Hood for initial screening, but hers was processed through the Navy Medical Center in San Diego." Riley felt a chill run down her spine. Why would a civilian recruit from Texas get processed through a Navy facility? In California? Could be a paperwork routing error, Thompson mused, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it either. Or she might have been living in San Diego when she enlisted, regardless of her official address. Sometimes people maintain residency in one state while actually living somewhere else. Can you dig deeper? Find out what she was doing between high school and enlistment. Thompson's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced speed, accessing databases that went beyond the standard military personnel files. Riley watched his expression grow more concerned as he worked through the search results. "Riley, this is strange. I'm finding gaps in her digital footprint that don't make sense for someone her age." Most people leave traces everywhere: social media accounts, credit history, employment records, educational transcripts. But Elena Martinez has almost nothing between ages 18 and 21. It's like she disappeared for 3 years. The implications hit Riley like a physical blow. People didn't simply vanish from the digital world without significant effort or institutional support. The kind of background scrubbing that would create such gaps required resources and expertise that civilian teenagers didn't possess. Marcus, I need you to run this through your security clearance channels. See if there are any classified addendums to her file that wouldn't show up in standard records. Thompson hesitated, his hand hovering over his keyboard. Riley, if there are classified elements to this recruit's background, that means we're dealing with something way above our pay grade. Are you sure you want to go down this rabbit hole? Riley thought about Elena's unnervingly calm demeanor, her advanced shooting skills, and her carefully worded non-answers to direct questions. Every instinct she'd developed over 12 years of military service was screaming that Elena Martinez was not who she appeared to be. Run the search, Marcus. If this comes back clean, I'll drop it. But if there's something hidden in her background, I need to know what it is. Thompson nodded reluctantly and began accessing the secure databases used for security clearance investigations. Riley watched the screen over his shoulder as he navigated through layers of encrypted files and restricted access portals. After nearly 10 minutes of searching, Thompson suddenly went very still. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at his monitor with an expression of barely controlled shock. Riley, he said quietly, you need to see this. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you is classified at a level that could end both our careers if we mishandle it. Riley's mouth went dry. Show me. Thompson angled his screen so she could read the text that had appeared. It was a security clearance addendum, heavily redacted, but the visible portions were enough to confirm her worst fears. Elena Martinez had indeed spent 3 years away from her official address. According to the classified documentation, she'd been enrolled in a joint military training program that operated outside normal command structures. The program's name was mostly redacted, but Riley could make out enough letters to piece together the words VIPER School. Riley had heard whispers about Viper School during her own advanced training courses, but she'd always assumed it was military legend rather than actual fact. According to the rumors, it was an ultra-classified program that took promising candidates from all branches of service and put them through training that made Navy SEAL preparation look like summer camp. The graduates supposedly went on to deep cover operations that never appeared in official records. Thompson, Riley whispered, please tell me this is some kind of administrative error. Thompson was scrolling through additional pages of the file, his expression growing more grave with each screen. There's more. Riley, Elena Martinez didn't just attend Viper School. She graduated in the top 5% of her class. She spent 18 months in advanced weapons training, hand-to-hand combat, psychological operations, and deep cover protocols. Riley's legs felt suddenly weak, and she had to grab the edge of Thompson's desk for support. Elena Martinez wasn't just a recruit with hidden talents. She was a trained operative whose true capabilities were classified at the highest levels of military intelligence. Why the hell is someone with this background going through basic training? Riley managed to ask. Thompson scrolled to the final page of the file, and Riley's blood turned to ice when she read the operational directive displayed there. Elena Martinez had been inserted into Fort Braxton's recruit training program as part of an ongoing security investigation. Her mission was to identify potential security vulnerabilities in the base's training protocols and personnel screening procedures. She was essentially conducting a real-world penetration test of the entire facility, and Riley Hammond had been her primary target. She's been evaluating me, Riley said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Every interaction we've had, every test I've put her through, she's been assessing my competence and looking for weaknesses in my training methods. Thompson nodded grimly. According to this file, the investigation was triggered by concerns about potential security breaches in the Southeastern Command structure. Someone suspected that classified information was being leaked through training facilities, and they needed an inside assessment of how recruits and personnel were being screened. Riley felt a surge of professional humiliation mixed with genuine anger. Elena had been playing her from the very beginning, using her superior training and operational experience to manipulate every encounter they'd shared. The careful questions about advanced marksmanship, the deliberately imperfect shooting performance, even the way she'd gradually revealed her capabilities, it had all been calculated to test Riley's responses and evaluation methods. "I need to confront her," Riley said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I need to know exactly what she's been reporting and how long this investigation has been running." "Riley, wait." Thompson grabbed her arm as she started to stand. "If you confront her directly, you could compromise an active intelligence operation. That kind of interference could result in court-martial proceedings for both of us." Riley jerked her arm free, her professional anger overriding her usual caution. "I don't care about politics, Marcus. One of my recruits has been lying to me for weeks, conducting surveillance on my training methods, and probably filing reports about my competence with some shadowy intelligence unit. I have a right to know what's in those reports." "You have a right to be angry," Thompson agreed. "But you don't have a right to derail a classified operation because your pride is hurt. If Elena Martinez is really as trained as this file suggests, confronting her could put you in serious danger." The warning hit Riley like cold water. In her anger and humiliation, she'd almost forgotten that Elena wasn't just a deceptive recruit. She was a highly trained operative with capabilities that Riley couldn't fully comprehend. The calm confidence that had initially bothered Riley now took on a much more sinister cast. Elena Martinez could probably kill her with her bare hands if the situation required it. Riley sank back into her chair, the full implications of the situation finally sinking in. She'd spent weeks trying to break down and rebuild someone who had already been forged in training programs that made her own experience look elementary. Every moment of their interaction had been carefully managed by someone operating at a level of professionalism that Riley was only beginning to understand. "What do I do, Marcus?" she asked quietly. "How do I handle a situation like this?" Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the classified file still displayed on his screen. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many careers destroyed by institutional politics. "You do your job, Riley. You continue training your recruits according to established protocols, and you pretend you never saw this file. Elena Martinez is here for reasons that go far beyond anything happening in your range, and the best thing you can do is stay out of her way." But Riley's mind was already working through the angles and implications. Elena's 1,400-hour appointment was still on the schedule, and there was no way she could simply pretend ignorance after what she'd discovered. The confrontation was going to happen whether it was advisable or not. The question was whether Riley would survive it with her career, and possibly her life, intact. Riley's office felt smaller than usual as she sat behind her metal desk, waiting for Elena's arrival. The afternoon sun streamed through the narrow windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor and highlighting the dust motes dancing in the stifling air. Every few seconds, she glanced at the wall clock, watching the minute hand creep closer to 1,400 hours. She'd spent the past 2 hours wrestling with how to handle the confrontation. Thompson's advice to stay out of Elena's way made sense from a career preservation standpoint, but Riley's professional integrity wouldn't allow her to simply pretend ignorance. She needed answers, even if getting them meant crossing lines that could destroy everything she'd worked to build. The knock on her door came at exactly 1400 hours, punctual to the second, as she'd expected from someone with Elena's training. "Enter." Elena stepped through the doorway in full dress uniform, her appearance flawless down to the last detail. She moved to a position 3 feet from Riley's desk and snapped to attention with textbook precision. But Riley could see something different in her posture now. The subtle restraint was still there, but underneath it was a coiled readiness that suggested Elena was prepared for this conversation to go in directions that had nothing to do with standard military discipline. "Private Martinez reporting, as ordered, Staff Sergeant." Riley studied Elena's face for any sign of nervousness or anticipation, but found only the same unsettling calm that had characterized all their previous interactions. If Elena suspected that her cover had been compromised, she was hiding it with professional skill. "At ease, Martinez. Have a seat." Elena settled into the wooden chair across from Riley's desk, her movements controlled and economical. Riley noticed that she positioned herself with clear lines of sight to both the door and the window, and kept her hands free and ready. The casual precautions of someone accustomed to environments where threat assessment was a constant necessity. "I've been thinking about our conversation on the range this morning," Riley began, choosing her words carefully. "About complicated truths and their consequences." "Yes, Staff Sergeant. I'm curious about something specific. You mentioned that some truths affect more people than just the person telling them. That's an interesting perspective for someone with your supposed background." Elena's expression didn't change, but Riley caught a slight shift in her breathing pattern. The recruit was evaluating the conversation's direction and calculating her responses with the same precision she'd shown on the firing range. "I think most people understand that honesty can sometimes create complications, Staff Sergeant. It's not an unusual observation." Riley leaned back in her chair, projecting an image of casual conversation while internally preparing for psychological warfare with someone trained in techniques she could barely imagine. "You're right, of course. But there are different kinds of complications. Personal complications, professional complications, and then there are the kinds of complications that involve national security and classified operations." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Riley watched Elena process the implication, looking for any crack in her professional composure. For just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker behind Elena's dark eyes, not fear, but a calculating assessment of new variables. "I'm not sure I follow your meaning, Staff Sergeant." "I think you follow it perfectly, Private Martinez. Or should I say Agent Martinez?" Elena's hands didn't move, her breathing didn't change, and her expression remained perfectly neutral. But something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of the small office. Riley could feel it like a change in air pressure before a storm, the sense that they'd crossed into territory where normal rules no longer applied. "Staff Sergeant, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm a recruit in the United States Army, following orders and completing my assigned training." Riley opened her desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder, not Elena's classified file, which she couldn't access from her office, but a standard personnel folder that would look legitimate at casual glance. She placed it on the desk between them and watched Elena's reaction. "This is your personnel file, Martinez. At least it's the version that most people see. The version that shows a nice girl from San Antonio with no military background and a perfectly ordinary civilian life." Elena glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. "That's correct, Staff Sergeant. That's who I am. Except it's not, is it? Because I did some digging this afternoon, and I found some very interesting discrepancies in your background. Gaps in your timeline, medical processing through the wrong facilities, and most interesting of all, a classified addendum that tells a completely different story about who Elena Martinez really is." Riley was bluffing partially. She couldn't reveal the specific details of what Thompson had shown her without exposing her unauthorized access to classified information. But she could use the general knowledge to pressure Elena into revealing how much she was willing to admit. Elena was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, her dark eyes focused on something beyond Riley's left shoulder. When she finally looked back, her expression had hardened into something that reminded Riley uncomfortably of the 1,000-yard stare she'd seen in combat veterans. "Staff Sergeant Hammond," Elena said quietly, "there are aspects of military service that operate outside the normal chain of command. Situations where the mission requirements supersede standard protocols and individual preferences." It wasn't quite an admission, but it was close enough to confirm Riley's suspicions. Elena was acknowledging that she was involved in something beyond normal recruit training, without explicitly revealing the details of her assignment. "I understand mission requirements, Martinez. What I don't understand is why someone with your level of training needs to deceive drill instructors and waste time in basic training programs designed for actual civilians." Elena's composure cracked slightly, and for the first time since Riley had met her, she looked genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. The question had clearly touched on something that Elena wasn't prepared to discuss, even in general terms. "Some training can't be replicated in controlled environments," Elena said finally. "Real-world assessment requires real-world conditions, with actual personnel who don't know they're being evaluated." Riley felt a surge of vindication mixed with renewed anger. Elena had essentially admitted that Riley and her training program were part of some kind of test scenario, but she still hadn't explained the scope or purpose of the evaluation. "So I'm a lab rat," Riley said flatly. "My training methods, my personnel management, my professional competence, it's all being assessed by someone whose real qualifications I can't even access. That's not how I would characterize the situation." "Staff Sergeant, then how would you characterize it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've been unknowingly participating in some kind of intelligence operation, and my career could be affected by evaluations I don't even know are happening." Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and Riley could see her weighing options and calculating risks. The conversation was clearly moving into territory that Elena's operational guidelines hadn't prepared her for. "Staff Sergeant Hammond, your reputation and competence are not in question. Your training methods are considered exemplary, and your personnel management skills are well above standard. If anything, this assignment has confirmed the high regard in which you're held by your superiors." The reassurance did nothing to diminish Riley's anger. If anything, it made the situation worse by confirming that Elena had been filing reports about her performance without her knowledge or consent. "I don't want your evaluation of my competence, Martinez. I want to know who you're really working for, what you're really investigating, and how long this charade is going to continue." Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with competing obligations and security protocols. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of genuine regret. "I can't give you those details, Staff Sergeant. I wish I could, but there are operational security requirements that I'm not authorized to violate, even under these circumstances." Riley had expected as much, but hearing the confirmation still stung. Elena's loyalty was to whatever shadowy organization had trained her, not to the drill instructors and training personnel she'd been deceiving for weeks. "Let me ask you something else then," Riley said, switching tactics. "How much of your performance on my range was real, and how much was theater designed to test my reactions?" Elena's expression softened slightly, and for the first time Riley caught a glimpse of something that might have been genuine emotion beneath the professional facade. "The deliberate imperfection was necessary to maintain my cover," Elena admitted. "But my respect for your training methods and your dedication to your recruits is completely genuine. You're an exceptional instructor, Staff Sergeant Hammond." Riley wasn't sure whether to be gratified or insulted by the praise. Elena's professional opinion might be worth something, but it was tainted by the deception that had made it possible. And what about this morning, when I pushed you to show your real capabilities? Was that part of your mission parameters, or did I force you off script? Elena actually smiled at that question, the first genuinely spontaneous expression Riley had seen. From her, it transformed her face completely, making her look like the 22-year-old she was supposed to be rather than the hardened operative she actually was. You definitely forced me off script, Staff Sergeant. My operational guidelines called for maintaining cover at all costs, but your persistence made that impossible without outright lying about direct orders. I had to make a judgment call about which protocols to prioritize. Riley found herself oddly pleased that her instincts and interrogation skills had been effective against someone with Elena's training. It was a small victory, but under the circumstances, she'd take whatever professional validation she could get. So what happens now? Riley asked. Do you file a report about this conversation? Do I get transferred to some remote posting where I can't interfere with ongoing operations? Do we both pretend this discussion never happened? Elena's expression grew serious again, and Riley could see her working through the implications and potential consequences of their conversation. Staff Sergeant, I need you to understand something important. The investigation I'm conducting isn't focused on individual personnel like yourself. It's designed to identify systemic vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile foreign intelligence services. Your part in this operation has been completely professional and above reproach. It was both reassuring and terrifying. Riley was apparently not under suspicion herself, but Elena's presence suggested that someone in the command structure believed Fort Braxton had been compromised at some level. Are you saying there's a security breach at this base? Elena hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much information she could safely reveal. I'm saying that recent intelligence suggests certain training facilities may have been targeted for infiltration or information gathering by hostile actors. My mission is to assess how easily someone with appropriate training could integrate into the system and access sensitive information. Riley felt cold fingers of fear creep up her spine. If foreign intelligence operatives were successfully infiltrating military training facilities, the implications for national security were staggering. Elena's mission wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a critical assessment of vulnerabilities that could be exploited by actual enemies. And how easily could someone infiltrate the system? Elena's expression grew grim, and Riley suddenly understood why her cover identity had been so thoroughly constructed. Much too easily, Staff Sergeant. Much too easily. The weight of Elena's words settled over Riley's office like a suffocating blanket. The implications of what she'd just heard went far beyond her personal concerns about being deceived or evaluated. If Elena was right about the security vulnerabilities at Fort Braxton, then every soldier who passed through their training programs could potentially be at risk. How long have you known? Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with how much she'd already revealed. Know what specifically, Staff Sergeant? Don't play word games with me anymore, Martinez. How long have you known that the base security could be compromised? Elena stared at the floor for several seconds before meeting Riley's eyes again. When she spoke, her voice carried a weariness that seemed far too mature for her supposed age. The initial intelligence reports started surfacing about 8 months ago. Foreign communications intercepts suggesting that someone was gathering detailed information about training protocols, personnel rotation schedules, and security procedures at multiple southeastern facilities. Riley's mind raced through the implications. 8 months would have been during the peak of their summer training cycle, when the base hosted its largest groups of new recruits and visiting personnel from other installations. What kind of information specifically? Details that could only come from someone with inside access, Elena replied grimly. Training schedules weeks in advance, personnel files including psychological evaluations, and most concerning, classified information about weapons storage and security protocols that should never leave the base. Riley felt her stomach clench with a combination of fear and professional outrage. The security breaches Elena was describing represented failures at multiple levels of the command structure, potentially putting thousands of soldiers and countless operational details at risk. And your mission is to figure out how the information is getting out? My mission is to determine whether the breaches are coming from personnel vulnerabilities, technological weaknesses, or systematic infiltration by trained operatives, Elena clarified. The assessment requires testing every aspect of the base's security infrastructure. Riley was beginning to understand the scope of Elena's assignment. It wasn't just about evaluating individual drill instructors or training methods. It was a comprehensive penetration test of the entire facility's defensive measures. How many other operatives are conducting similar assessments? Elena's expression became guarded again. I can't discuss operational details that don't directly relate to your involvement, Staff Sergeant. It was a non-answer that told Riley everything she needed to know. Elena wasn't working alone. There were other highly trained operatives embedded throughout Fort Braxton, probably in positions ranging from new recruits to administrative personnel to visiting instructors. The thought made Riley's skin crawl. Every interaction she'd had over the past months could have involved people who weren't who they claimed to be. Every casual conversation, every shared meal in the mess hall, every professional consultation with colleagues, all of it potentially compromised by operatives, gathering intelligence for purposes she couldn't fully comprehend. Are you going to tell me that I can't trust anyone on this base? Riley asked, hearing the edge of desperation in her own voice. I'm going to tell you that the situation is more complex than most personnel realize, Elena replied carefully. But I'm also going to tell you that the vast majority of people here are exactly who they appear to be. The assessment is designed to identify vulnerabilities, not to suspect everyone of being a security risk. Riley wasn't sure whether Elena's reassurance was genuine or simply part of her operational protocol for managing compromised personnel. The distinction mattered less than the practical reality that Riley's entire professional world had become uncertain overnight. What happens to me now? Riley asked bluntly. Do I get briefed into whatever operation you're running? Do I get transferred somewhere else? Do I get monitored to make sure I don't compromise your mission? Elena was quiet for nearly a minute, and Riley could see her working through options that probably weren't covered in her operational guidelines. The conversation had clearly moved beyond what Elena had been prepared to handle, but there was no putting the knowledge back in the box. Staff Sergeant Hammond, I need to make some communications with my superiors about how to proceed. This conversation has created complications that require guidance from people with higher security clearances than mine. Riley felt a chill of fear. Elena's need to consult with her handlers suggested that Riley had stumbled into something far more serious than a routine security assessment. The kind of complications that required high-level guidance were often the kind that ended careers. Or worse, am I in danger, Martinez? Elena's expression softened, and for a moment Riley caught another glimpse of the genuine person beneath the operational facade. Not from me, Staff Sergeant, and not from anyone connected to my mission. But if there really are hostile operatives embedded in this facility, then everyone here is potentially at risk until we identify and neutralize the threats. The admission hit Riley like a physical blow. Elena wasn't just investigating theoretical vulnerabilities, she was hunting actual enemy agents who were already inside Fort Braxton's security perimeter. Jesus Christ, Riley whispered. How long do you think they've been here? Based on the intelligence timeline, possibly years. Long enough to establish deep cover identities and gain access to classified information that should have been impossible to obtain. Riley's mind immediately went to her colleagues and subordinates, people she'd worked with for years and trusted implicitly. The thought that some of them might be foreign operatives was almost too disturbing to process. "Do you have suspects?" Elena shook her head. "If I had specific suspects, this conversation would be happening very differently. The investigation is still in the assessment phase, trying to understand how the security breaches are occurring before identifying who might be responsible." Riley realized that Elena's candor was probably a calculated risk. By revealing the scope of the operation, Elena was essentially recruiting Riley as an unwitting asset in her investigation. Riley's knowledge of the base personnel and procedures could be invaluable for identifying potential security risks. "You want my help," Riley said, understanding dawning in her voice. "I want your discretion," Elena corrected. "And your awareness. You're in a position to observe personnel interactions and training procedures that I can't access from my current cover identity. If you notice anything unusual or concerning, it could be relevant to the investigation." Riley felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Elena was asking her to become an informal intelligence gatherer, watching her colleagues and subordinates for signs of suspicious behavior or security violations. "What am I supposed to be looking for specifically?" "Personnel who seem unusually interested in information outside their normal duties. People who ask questions about procedures or schedules that don't relate to their assignments. Anyone with access patterns that don't match their supposed responsibilities." The criteria Elena described could apply to dozens of people on the base. Military personnel were naturally curious about operations beyond their immediate scope, and the fluid nature of training schedules meant that people frequently needed information about activities outside their direct control. "That describes half the people I work with," Riley said. "Military curiosity isn't exactly unusual." "You're right," Elena acknowledged. "That's why this investigation is so complex. The behaviors we're looking for are often indistinguishable from normal military professionalism and operational awareness." Riley was beginning to understand why Elena's superiors had chosen such an elaborate and resource-intensive approach to the investigation. Identifying trained operatives embedded in a military environment required techniques and expertise that went far beyond conventional security procedures. "How long is this investigation going to continue?" "Until we identify and neutralize the security breaches, or until my superiors determine that the threats have been eliminated through other means." Elena's phrasing was ominous in its vagueness. Riley suspected that other means could include anything from mass personnel transfers to facility closure, depending on how serious the security compromises proved to be. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation, causing both women to tense immediately. Riley glanced at her schedule and realized that she had completely forgotten about her 14:30 appointment with Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Baker, the base training coordinator. "Come in," Riley called. Forcing her voice to sound normal. Baker entered the office with her usual brisk efficiency, her attention focused on the tablet computer she carried everywhere. She was halfway through explaining some administrative issue before she noticed Elena sitting in the chair across from Riley's desk. "Oh, I'm sorry, Riley. I didn't realize you were in a personnel meeting. Should I come back later?" Riley's mind raced through possible explanations that wouldn't arouse suspicion or compromise Elena's cover. "No problem, Colonel. Private Martinez was just finishing up. We were discussing some marksmanship issues from this morning's range session." Baker glanced at Elena with the casual assessment of a senior officer evaluating junior personnel. Elena immediately stood and came to attention, her body language shifting back into perfect recruit behavior. "Private Martinez, isn't it?" Bakura said, consulting her tablet. "I've been hearing good things about your progress in the training program." "Thank you, Colonel," Elena replied with exactly the right mix of pride and humility. Riley watched the interaction with new eyes, seeing Elena's performance as the masterful piece of operational theater it really was. Every gesture, every vocal inflection, Every detail of her bearing was perfectly calibrated to project the image of a motivated but unremarkable recruit. "Well, don't let me interrupt your training discussion," Baker said to Riley. "But I do need to talk to you about the new evaluation protocols we're implementing next month. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Riley felt trapped between maintaining Elena's cover and dealing with her legitimate military responsibilities. The conversation with Elena was far from over, but there was no way to continue it with Baker present. "Private Martinez, report back." "To your unit," Riley said, falling back on standard military procedure. "We'll continue our discussion about advanced marksmanship techniques at a later time." Elena nodded and headed for the door, but as she passed Riley's desk, she paused for just a moment. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but loud enough for Riley to hear clearly. "Staff Sergeant, remember what we discussed about complicated truths. Some conversations are better continued in more private settings." The message was clear. Elena wanted to meet again, away from the official military environment, where their conversation could be interrupted or overheard. Riley nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the suggestion without committing to anything specific. As Elena left the office, Riley found herself studying Baker with new suspicion. The timing of the colonel's arrival felt almost too convenient, and her casual interest in Elena's progress could have been genuine administrative concern or something more calculated. For the first time in her military career, Riley Hammond felt completely unable to trust her own judgment about the people around her, and that terrified her more than any enemy she'd ever faced. 3 days passed before Riley found an opportunity to meet with Elena away from the official military environment. The delay had been agonizing, filled with sleepless nights and constant second-guessing of every interaction with her colleagues and subordinates. Every casual conversation in the mess hall felt potentially compromised. Every administrative meeting carried the possibility of hidden agendas. Riley finally arranged the meeting by scheduling an evening equipment inventory in Building 7, an isolated storage facility that housed training materials and ammunition supplies. The building's remote location and legitimate military purpose would provide cover for their conversation, while minimizing the risk of interruption or surveillance. Elena arrived at exactly 1900 hours, appearing in the doorway like a shadow despite the bright fluorescent lighting of the storage bay. She was dressed in standard duty uniform, but Riley noticed the way she positioned herself with clear sight lines to all exits and approached the meeting with the hyper-aware caution of someone accustomed to dangerous environments. "Staff Sergeant," Elena said quietly, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Martinez, thank you for coming." Riley had spent the past 3 days preparing for this conversation, trying to organize her thoughts and questions into some coherent framework. But now that Elena was standing in front of her, she found herself struggling to know where to begin. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Riley said finally, "about the security breaches and the investigation. I need to know more about what I'm supposed to be looking for." Elena moved deeper into the storage bay, her eyes continuously scanning their surroundings. "Before we continue, I need to tell you that my superiors have made some decisions about your involvement in this operation." Riley felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "What kind of decisions?" "You've been cleared for limited operational briefing," Elena said, pulling a sealed envelope from inside her jacket. "Your security clearance has been temporarily elevated, and you're now officially read into certain aspects of the investigation." Riley took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. The official government seal and classification markings made the situation feel suddenly real in a way that their previous conversations hadn't. She was no longer stumbling into something by accident. She was being formally recruited into an active intelligence operation. "What does this mean for my normal duties?" "It means you continue your regular assignment while providing observational support for the security assessment," Elena explained. Your training responsibilities remain unchanged, but you'll also be watching for specific indicators that could help identify potential security risks. Riley opened the envelope and began reading the classified briefing document inside. The information was more detailed and disturbing than anything Elena had previously revealed. According to the intelligence summary, foreign operatives had successfully infiltrated at least 4 military training facilities in the southeastern United States, gathering classified information for nearly 2 years before being detected. Fort Braxton is definitely compromised? Riley asked, looking up from the document. Almost certainly. The pattern of information leakage matches the other facilities where we've confirmed hostile infiltration. The question isn't whether there are enemy operatives here, it's how many, and how long they've been in place. Riley continued reading, her professional concern growing with each page. The operatives weren't just gathering information passively. They were actively influencing training protocols, personnel assignments, and even individual soldier career paths in ways that could compromise national security for decades. This is about more than stealing secrets, Riley realized. They're trying to shape the entire military training system. Elena nodded grimly. If you can influence how soldiers are trained and evaluated, you can potentially create vulnerabilities that won't become apparent until those soldiers are deployed in critical situations. It's a long-term strategy that could undermine military effectiveness at the most fundamental level. The implications were staggering. Riley thought about all the recruits who had passed through her programs over the years, wondering how many of them might have been affected by subtly compromised training protocols or evaluation criteria. How do we identify them? Riley asked. Elena pulled out a small tablet computer and showed Riley a series of photographs and personnel files. These are individuals who have been flagged for enhanced monitoring based on their access patterns, communication behaviors, and background inconsistencies. Some of them work directly with your training programs. Riley studied the faces on the screen, feeling a chill of recognition as she identified several people she knew professionally. Master Sergeant Kevin Torres from the Weapons Maintenance Section, Captain Amanda Foster from the Psychological Evaluation Unit, Sergeant First Class Michael Chun from Communications Support. I work with these people regularly, Riley said, her voice hollow with shock. Kevin Torres has been servicing our range equipment for 3 years. Amanda Foster conducted personality assessments on half my recruits, which gives them perfect access to the kind of information that's been compromised, Elena pointed out. Equipment maintenance schedules, personnel psychological profiles, training effectiveness data, all of it valuable intelligence for someone planning to exploit our defensive capabilities. Riley felt physically sick as she contemplated the scope of the potential betrayal. These weren't strangers or obvious suspicious characters. They were colleagues she'd shared meals with, people whose families she'd met at base social events. Professional relationships built over years of shared military service. What happens to them now? Nothing immediate, Elena said, taking back the tablet. Direct confrontation or arrest would alert other operatives who haven't been identified yet. The priority is continuing the investigation until we understand the full scope of the network. Riley understood the operational logic, but the emotional impact of continuing to work alongside potential enemy agents was almost overwhelming. Every interaction would now carry the weight of uncertainty and suspicion. How long can this continue? My mission parameters allow for up to 6 months of deep cover assessment, Elena replied. But based on what we've discovered so far, I suspect the operation will conclude much sooner. Elena's expression suggested that the conclusion might not be pleasant for anyone involved. Riley suspected that once the investigation was complete, Fort Braxton would experience massive personnel changes in security, overhauls that would fundamentally alter the base's operational character. What do you need from me specifically? Elena consulted a small notebook from her jacket pocket. Continue your normal duties, but pay particular attention to any unusual requests for information from the flagged personnel. Document any conversations where they seem unusually interested in details outside their normal responsibilities. And most importantly, don't change your behavior in any way that might suggest you're aware of the investigation. It was going to be the hardest acting job of Riley's career. Maintaining normal professional relationships with people she now suspected of treason would require every ounce of her military discipline and emotional control. "Elena," Riley said, using the operative's first name deliberately. "I need to ask you something personal. How do you do this? How do you maintain relationships with people while knowing that everything about your identity is a lie?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting something that might have been genuine sadness. "You learn to compartmentalize," she said finally. "The mission requirements become more important than personal comfort or emotional honesty. But it's not sustainable indefinitely. People like me have limited operational lifespans before the psychological cost becomes too high." Riley suddenly understood why Elena had revealed so much during their earlier conversations. The strain of maintaining deep cover while conducting such a complex investigation was taking its toll, even on someone with Elena's extensive training. "How old are you really?" Riley asked. Elena smiled slightly, the first genuinely spontaneous expression Riley had seen from her since learning her true identity. 20-6. "I've been doing this kind of work for almost 4 years now. This is probably my last deep cover assignment before I transition to training and support roles." Riley felt an unexpected surge of protective concern for the younger woman. Elena's calm professionalism had made it easy to forget that she was barely out of her early 20s, dealing with pressures and responsibilities that most people couldn't imagine. "When this is over, what happens to you?" "I disappear," Elena said matter-of-factly. "Elena Martinez ceases to exist, and I become someone else entirely. It's the only way to maintain operational security for future assignments." The casual way Elena discussed erasing her identity was both impressive and deeply disturbing. Riley couldn't imagine the psychological resilience required to repeatedly construct and abandon entire personalities. "And what happens to us? To this conversation and everything we've shared?" Elena looked directly into Riley's eyes, and for a moment her operational mask slipped completely. "Staff Sergeant Hammond, you've been one of the most genuine people I've encountered in years of undercover work. When this mission is complete, I'm going to remember our interactions as a reminder of why the work we do matters. But officially, this conversation never happened, and Elena Martinez was just another recruit who passed through your training program." Riley nodded, understanding the operational necessities while regretting the human cost. Elena would return to whatever shadowy organization had trained her, carrying the burden of secrets and artificial identities that few people could comprehend. "For what it's worth," Riley said, "you've been an exceptional recruit. Your marksmanship skills are outstanding, your military bearing is perfect, and your dedication to the mission is inspiring." Elena's smile was both grateful and melancholy. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That means more than you know." As Elena prepared to leave the storage facility, Riley realized that their relationship would now return to the careful theater of drill, instructor and recruit. But she would never again look at Elena Martinez without seeing the highly trained operative beneath the surface, carrying secrets that could affect national security. 3 weeks later, Elena Martinez completed her basic training cycle with distinction and was transferred to an advanced communication school in Virginia. Her departure was processed through normal military channels, with no indication that her presence at Fort Braxton had been anything other than standard recruit training. Riley never saw her again, but 2 months after Elena's departure, she noticed that several personnel who had been flagged during their conversation were quietly transferred to different assignments. Master Sergeant Torres received orders to a logistics position in Germany. Captain Foster was reassigned to a desk job at the Pentagon. Sergeant First Class Chun took early retirement due to family circumstances. Riley never learned the final outcome of the security investigation, but the personnel changes suggested that Elena's mission had been successful. Fort Braxton continued its training mission with enhanced security protocols and a new awareness of vulnerabilities that most military personnel would never fully understand. And sometimes, late at night in her quarters, Riley would remember the quiet confidence of a young woman who had taught her that in the modern military, the most dangerous enemies often wore friendly faces and carried impeccable credentials. The shooting stance that had started everything was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.